Alan Stratton from As Wood Turns. A few months ago, during a visit with my brother, we were playing cards and discussing wood turning. Talked about various ideas. One that came up was a box for playing cards. We're playing cards after all. I said, well, it need to be round. But he says, no, playing cards are square. It needs to be square. So, okay, well, thought about it. Well, here's one idea I came up with. This is a wood-turned playing card box, yes, and from all appearances it looks round, as most wood-turning projects are, but inside you'll see that it is square, so that the playing cards fit in the square interior. So, let's make this round, but square inside, playing card box.
Although I originally made the sliding sled for this project, I found that my saw could not quite tilt to 45 degrees. Fortunately, this board is short enough to fit in the chop saw. I'm not as certain my setup will accurately hold tall pieces. We'll see. When the board got short, I did not feel safe, so I changed to spring clamps to keep my hands out of harm's way. On to the glue up. I did not want to clean glue from the inner faces, so I covered the inside faces with masking tape. In retrospect, I should have sanded and finished these faces before cutting the angles. I laid out tape to guide the joints together, spread Titebond original extended glue, and rolled up the pieces and used a couple of plastic band clamps for clamping pressure. On to cutting the segments for the base and top. I'm using 8 segments, so the angle is 22.5 degrees. Then on to glue the segments into rings. I'm using an automotive band clamp from an auto parts store. Air conditioning people also use big band clamps. I spread glue on the joining faces of each half, then put small dowels between the two halves. Once dry, I'll sand the joint between the halves before gluing them together. A thickness sander saves a lot of time in sanding the faces of the rings to be flat and parallel to each other. But this could be done also on a lathe, but one at a time. I mounted the rings with little pieces of double stick tape to a piece of particle board. This prevents the pieces from tipping while in the sander. I'm using threaded wood faceplates. This one is for the top. I'm using Lloyd Johnson stomper with a modified Longworth chuck to align the rings for gluing. A little masking tape marks the desired alignment point. It helps a lot to know where to align them before spreading glue. My finger is a handy glue spreader. I never rely on segment points matching in a base. I've mounted the base to a wood threaded faceplate, and with hot melt glue, I'll bore out the center and glue in an end grain maple plug. As a fringe benefit, the light maple will allow a good area to sign the finished piece. Since I scorched the walnut a little, I'm trimming it just a little to help out the glue bond. I've mounted the square body to a faceplate. I need to rough out a tenon to go into the base. I'm a little bit nervous about the end grain bond between the body segments. There's only 4 joints, and I'll be cutting away a lot of the joint. I've wrapped the body with duct tape to try and contain the pieces if they were to separate. I want the additional strength from the glue joint between the base mortise and the tenon before I do the remainder of the rough turning. Now I'm cutting the mortise into the base. The mortise will preserve as much of the body height as possible if I make the mortise bottom flat across the entire box. Then I'll true up the tenon to fit and glue it together. Now for the tenon on the square portion. Easy does it. I don't have a lot of surplus to absorb mistakes. Next is the maple ring that goes just above the square portion. This will be a mortise and tenon joint also to reinforce the top end of the square portion. Then I'll be able to relax a bit from fear of the square portion joint failing. I'll use a square carbide cutter here to get the straight sides I need. Here I did the fitting the hard way by fitting the mortise to the tenon. While that glue dries, I'll rough out the top of the box with a gouge. I'll switch back to a square carbide to start the mortise for the joint between the lid and the base. I'll gauge whether the cut is parallel by sighting a pin to the lathe bedways. I switch to a round carbide cutter to scrape the inside of the lid, then sand and finish the interior. Next, fit the tenon for the joint with a square carbide cutter. A lot of stopping to test the fit. Now for an interesting part. I did not want to leave the walnut top square just below the maple rim, so from the other side of the lathe I carefully cut a chamfer on the walnut and undercut the maple just a little bit. I think it turned out nice, much better than expected. Now to put the pieces together for the first time. I can refine the exterior and the flow between the lid and the base. I'll use a gouge followed by a square carbide cutter. Finally, I'll burn a line at the joint between the square portion and the base. There's just a little more refinement needed on the tippy top of the lid. I have a good friction fit, but I'll reinforce it with masking tape. Then easy does it to trim the top and drill a hole for the finial. Now I reverse the base on the chuck in an expansion hold. Easy does it to remove the excess from the base, then refine the look and feel. I'll thin down the base and dish it out a little bit and add a couple of decorative grooves. Here I'm using somewhat oval carbide cutter. Finally, a simple finial. Fortunately, my long nose jaws would barely hold the 1/4 inch tenon when I reverse it. This is gouge and skew territory. This was a challenging project, not only for the square inside, but also in putting it all together. I was constrained by the width and thickness of my walnut. I totally violated the golden mean, yet it looks nice and does have the square interior. I met the challenge. This is Alan Stratton from aswoodturns.com. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to my website and YouTube channel. Good turning? Please wear your face shield.